Here again, yes. Nice to meet you, Maria. I heard a lot about you from Jan Ole.
Oh,
right?
Yes.
You're working with him,
Yes.
or?
Yes. Yeah. He's sitting across the hall from me, along with Arne Isaksen.
So you are also from Agder.
Yes, I am.
You are always everywhere, Agder people. That's good, of course.
Yeah.
I'm working with Jan Ole on a paper.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. I have been working for a long time with Jan Ole on this paper.
Okay.
It will be really good. Really
yeah, with every rejection, it gets better.
Yeah, I did one paper with Romulo Pinheiro from Agder and Roser Norman and Jutso Tsai, and we wrote it like 2.5 years. And we forgot it, then we continued, then we changed the plan, then we forgot the whole thing. Then somebody said, hey, we have this paper, we should write that. Because it was not related to any project, and so it turned out to be really nice.
The good thing, if you haven't worked for it for a long time, and then suddenly you start reading it and think, oh, it's pretty good. Oh, whoa. That usually happens. But
then you have 4 authors, then somebody is saying, hey, what are we doing actually here? Yeah, that's why deadlines are so important.
Yeah. I will just try to share my screen now because I have never used.
Sure.
I've never used that here before. Teams.
And you are the first one, so it's good to do it like that. So far, so good.
No.
Yeah, you are.
Yes. Good. Stop sharing.
I think you can leave it there because you are the first one and it's 5 minutes to go, so it doesn't.
Okay.
I think people don't need to see me because there is, nothing to see basically.
Well, but you have nice books there in behind.
That's my professional decoration.
Okay, artificial.
No, it's really. I'm at home.
But then when you present in Teams, you don't see anything, only your own slides. That's boring.
That's bad because you don't see chat or anything.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's another function because we tried. It's if you go to share screen and then go further down to PowerPoint Live, and then choose the file or the presentation that you want to share, then you get your slide, all the other slides, and is that correct, Gary?
Yeah, absolutely, it works in that way. And also, if you close your PowerPoint now, and then go to open it again, then it gives you option work in Teams or something like that. So you can choose that one, and then you have the same result.
But can you see chat and participants and all that? Because
I think so.
Yeah, but there are some differences between versions. I'm a Mac user, and sometimes the updates for Teams Mac are late, and I several times have been told that, but you can do it. You just do this and that, and then but I can't. And then after a few months, I can. So that may be one
permanent problem of Mac users.
Yeah, but the pros are greater than. But Kari, the pros are greater than cons. So I'm happy to pay the price. I've been a Mac user since 1986.
Yeah.
And Mac was introduced 1984.
By the way, when I was in Tampere, it was 93.
Yeah.
And I used also this Mac. That was very handy.
Yeah, and in the mid-80s, our department was filled with Macs. But then in the 90s, the university said that we are not supporting Macs anymore, and then we became endangered species. But I'm having my own Mac, and so. But now it's different again. So now they don't have the prejudice anymore. Now I'm trying to look at Roman is here, Moritz is here, Yifei I don't see yet. Maria is here, so yeah, 3 out of 4 so far. That's good. Complete silence, and whenever I'm teaching on Zoom and I would like the students to pose questions or have a conversation, and it's a complete silence, and I always label that as a Zoom silence.
Yeah.
Because it's really deep if the cameras are closed and nobody is saying anything. It's
Yeah. I usually ask them to turn on cameras at least.
Yeah.
Then you see some movement.
Yeah. One of my colleagues did that once when she started the course and said that she wants to have cameras open, and then there was one young lady who saw it immediately. No, I can't do it. I don't have makeup.
No.
So I think the policy at our university is that cameras should be open, but in practice, that's quite difficult to follow. So it's,
So Roman, you had it already in full screen, but now it's back in.
Yeah, because I could not find this option that you described, and I want to see you until we start. So I put it on full screen as soon as we start.
Yeah, I think it's now time to start. It's 11 o'clock sharp, and something else wherever, depending on wherever you are. Welcome to this session on new path formation and regional restructuring. My name is Markku Sotarauta. I'm sharing this session. We are having 4 papers. Everybody is here. That's nice. And it means that we'll have 15 minutes for presentation and then a few minutes for discussion. And so, Roman, the Zoom is yours. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Markku, you have to stop me when I go over time.
Yeah, I will say something 3 minutes before.
Say something nice.
Yeah. Okay.
So my name is Roman Martin. I'm an associate professor in economic geography working at the Department of Business Administration in Gothenburg. And the paper I'm presenting here is ongoing work with my colleague Hanna Martin. And the title is The Role of Demand in Regional Industrial Transformation, Examples from the Swedish Periphery. And that's an outcome of a research project that we have been working in for a while now, which deals with the role that demand plays in regional transformation processes, and where we look at green transformations in the food industry in 2 different Swedish regions. So now you're going to hear some of the findings, empirical findings from this project. So expect to hear something about the role of demand in greening of 2 Swedish food industries. So the whole starting point behind the project and also this paper is the observation that a lot of debate now, a lot of discussion now in economic geography deals with the question how new industries emerge and develop over time. And that's often framed under the umbrella term new regional industrial path development. The really agenda setting contributions come from evolutionary economic geography and all this discussion about endogenously triggered branching processes and based on related variety, where industries diversify into new fields. But then also recently, the last couple of years, a lot of other economic geographers have contributed to that debate and provided new perspectives on that. So now we see a lot of literature on the role of institutions, the role of policy, and also the role of agency. So if you have been in the session yesterday with Marco, he has presented on the role of agency in regional transformation processes. And I think also the paper the last paper in this session by Maria will also deal with something related to the role of agency on new path development processes. So it's quite an active debate around that. What we argue that most of the literature, if not all of the literature, sees innovation as the fundamental driving force behind new path development processes. What is hardly ever discussed in that literature, in the literature and economic geography in general, is the role that demand plays. With demand we mean consumer behaviors, customers, and of course you can argue that new path development processes or regional transformation processes can also be the result of changes in demand when consumers change their preferences and request new or different products and services. And of course, if the consumers demand new things, then the producers would also supply to that. And if you ask someone in marketing, then of course they will say, of course the consumer is very important, and companies do what consumers want. But in the economic geography debate, that is not taken up a lot. So the aim of this paper and also the project is to advance our understanding of the role that demand plays in new path development processes. The first step we did is to develop a conceptual framework. So we did a lot of literature reviews, or we did a review of the literature of different streams of literature, trying to find out what these different literatures have to say when it comes to the role of demand. And even though they don't talk, many of these literatures don't talk explicitly about demand, there are of course some traces here and there. So for example, when you look at the literature on industrial districts and innovative milieus, there is a discussion on the global demand conditions that are changing and how they influence local production systems. The literature on clusters argues that it's good if you're located in a region with a lot of sophisticated buyers, because that will force you to deliver the latest products and to be innovative as well. Then the literature on regeneration systems and learning regions. There are a lot of focus is on co-production and user-producer interactions and interactive learning between companies. So it's more some form of active co-developing that is discussed there. Then the literature on regional governance. There the argument is often that policy can engage into public procurement, and through public procurement processes, they can steer innovation and economic development. And then we have a more recent literature on economic valuation, and they argue that changing consumer norms, values, and habits can lead to the emergence of new markets. Yeah, so after this literature review, we identified a couple of roles that demand can play. And then in the empirical analysis, we went out into the field in order to observe if we can find these roles. So the empirical analysis that we did took place in two Swedish regions, two very different Swedish regions. So one of the cases is Scania in southern Sweden, which can be defined or regarded as a thick and diversified regeneration system, so relatively strong region with densely populated urban centers, Malmö, Lund, Helsingborg, where we can also expect to find a sophisticated demand. They have a strong regional research and development system, and also policymakers that are actively engaged in supporting the food sector. And traditionally, there is a number of food companies in the region. So we could identify 350 food processing companies, and also a number of internationally active food companies that you might know. For example, Oatly, the oat milk producer. They are active now worldwide, and they have their headquarters and they stem from southern Sweden, or also Findus and other companies, food processing companies. And then we have our other case, our second case, that's Värmland. Here, in yellow here, located close to the Norwegian border, typical thin regeneration system, located in a peripheral area of Sweden, dominated by traditional industries such as paper and pulp, sparsely populated. So there is only one agglomeration, that's Karlstad, which is not a very big city either. So you can argue from a industry perspective that there is a lack of industrial variety that could lead to regional branching processes. And in that region, we identified around 50 food processing companies. Some of them are, or most of them are active locally or on the Swedish market. And if you're from Sweden, you might know Löfbergs Lila, the coffee producer, or OLW. They produce potato chips. So they are active on the Swedish market, and they are the most well-known ones in the region. So two food industries and very different types of regions in different parts of Sweden. What we did then empirically is to start with a survey that we sent out to all the companies in the two regions with a number of questions on whether or not and how they introduced new environmentally friendly products and services. So a number of questions we asked, and we got a response of around 25% of the companies. And then in a second step, we did field trips. So we went there and, of course, arranged interviews beforehand, talked to policymakers, and interviewed 10 companies in each of the regions. So 10 companies that we have identified before in the survey as potentially interesting. So I would now talk a bit about, or give you some insights from both the survey and from the interviews in Värmland. So this is one of the questions that we asked in the survey, whether they have introduced any new and significantly more environmentally friendly products than traditional ones during the last 5 years. And we can see here that around 50% of the firms in Skåne and almost 70% of the firms in Värmland stated that they have introduced new environmentally friendly products. And then what we actually wanted to know is to learn about these drivers and hinders. So actually the role that demand played in this introduction of new environmentally friendly products. So we asked them about a couple of questions that refer to these different roles. And in the survey, the result that we got is for those companies that introduced new environmentally friendly products, a very important enabler was the growing demand for environmentally friendly products in Sweden. So they observed a growing demand, but they also observed a change in norms and values, so that there is a growing interest in environmental matters in the society at large, and also that they then think that producing environmentally friendly is good for the company's image and reputation. So the enablers were really related to changes in actual demand in Sweden, but also changing norms and values in the society. Factors that didn't play a role for those companies were profitability. So they say basically that these environmental friendly products are not necessarily more profitable. And they also said that the new technological developments were not among the enablers. So they were not dependent on new technologies. So this is what we asked the firms that introduced new products, new environmental friendly products. And we also asked those that did not introduce new environmentally friendly products, and we got more or less the opposed picture. So they also said that for their customers, their customers don't request environmentally friendly products, and they say that the absence of technological solutions was not something that would hinder them. So that's some results from the survey. And then in order to get the more lively stories, we went there and interviewed companies. And that's one of the cases, one of the entrepreneurs that we interviewed from a local dairy, Värmlandsmejeriet. And the story that we got, not only from talking to him, but from different actors then, also policymakers, was the following, that basically for 20 or 30 years, there was no dairy production there was no dairy in Värmland. And the milk industry was organized in a way that the farmers would sell all their milk to one multinational company, that's Arla Foods. Arla Foods would ship all the milk to Stockholm, where it would be processed further and then sold throughout Sweden as Swedish milk. And because milk prices were so low in the 2000s, many of the local farmers felt very much under pressure. And in 2015, a group of 8 milk farmers took an initiative. And what they did is they purchased an old dairy plant that was still standing there, renovated this dairy plant, and started their own dairy called Värmlandsmejeri. They were pretty smart. Okay, they were pretty smart because they hired a local design studio to take care of the branding. This design studio started a branding and marketing strategy. They took care of the packaging, so you see these nice packages. And they started an advertisement campaign where they displayed the farmers and the cows working together as local heroes, getting up every morning and working hard in order to get the milk to the people living in the region. And they were so successful that a few years later, 70% of all the milk sold in the supermarkets in Värmland come from Värmlandsmejeriet. So they really took over the shelves in the supermarkets. And 15 milk farmers are now connected to the dairy. So then, in order to get the real story behind, or the more fine-grained story behind it, we can say that there have been a couple of driving forces behind that development. One was that Arla Foods was involved in a couple of food scandals, which created mistrust among consumers. The retailers, which have direct access to consumers, played a very important role here because they were very supportive to this local milk brand and launched this new milk prominently in the shelves. Public sector didn't really play a role, but what definitely played a role is changing consumer norms and values, because these local consumers really wanted to buy locally produced milk, and Värmlandsmejeriet could convince or could show that all the value chain is locally. So both milk production, processing, packaging, branding, advertising, everything is done by firms from the region, and new technological developments didn't really play a role. Then we have a second case, but I won't go into detail now because there is no time. It's about breweries in Värmland, where the story is similar, but where we have started with one brewery, and now we have around 16 microbreweries. So there is something that you can really call a beer industry in that region that started from the scratch. So to round up, the paper, we are still writing on the paper, so the conclusions are not path-breaking. But what we can definitely say that in the cases that we have seen, demand has played multiple roles. These different roles coexist and simultaneously influence new path development. What remains to be explored are regional differences in the role of demand. So we haven't done that yet. But what we can also definitely say is new technological advancements or innovation is only one among many driving forces for new path development. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Roman. It's easy to agree with you that demand is an important aspect and it should be understood better in our field also. So questions, comments, expressions of joy and delight? No immediate reactions. In the early part of your presentation, you said that in path development studies, the focus is quite largely on innovation as a main driving force. And you argue for more studies on demand. That's good, of course, but how much your cases are about industrial path formation? Is there a new industry emerging, or is there a complete renewal of existing industry, upgrading, diversification, or is this more like individual cases? So how much can you argue for industrial path development based on your study?
Well, the cases that we've seen, of course, I mean, it's subsectors of the food industry. And I would say that in the case of the milk dairy plant, still is one plant. So it's a bit hard to really say that this is yet a whole path. But you can see the dairy industry as a connection of different firms active in a certain field. So if you don't look only at the dairy plant, but all the companies that are involved, so the farmers, the companies taking care of the packaging. So there is some form of new industry or industrial renewal maybe taking place. And in the case of the beer microbrewery industry, I think there is definitely a totally new path, because that type of activities, brewing beer, making beer, has not existed in the region for 60 years. And now, based on in the case, the story was an entrepreneur having lived in Stockholm before and getting an impression of all this. He was early on in noticing this growing trend of microbreweries that is taking place nationally and globally. And then he started the first brewery out of nothing in Värmland, and that triggered other entrepreneurs also to start breweries. And then they were learning from each other and experimenting around. And now there is something that you can actually call a brewery industry with 16 different breweries. But of course, the boundaries between what is path creation and what is path renewal are blurry. And it's also very difficult to conceptually and empirically specify what is a path. Yeah, I would also like to know more about that, because I think most of the path development literature is talking around that without really specifying what actually is a path.
Yeah, agreed. Gary, go ahead.
Yeah, actually, agriculture is very highly controlled market. And probably there are also important governmental sticks, or EU sticks and carrots. So what kind of incentives and restrictions play also a role in this restructuring? Or
alcohol, you mean?
Sorry?
You said alcohol?
No. Different incentives and restrictions from the government side, government policy impact.
Yeah. We didn't look so much at EU policy and supranational policy, but what we looked at national and regional policies, and the role that policy played in this path development processes. Well, in the first case of the dairy production, we looked at the policy has different ways how it can influence that, and one way is through schools and public procurement. So the question is then whether the local government has, or the regional policy has, the possibility to purchase milk that comes from a certain company or not, or whether they have to purchase the milk that is cheapest for schools, and so that's a way. And then in the alcohol, in the beer case, of course, in Sweden, the alcohol market is highly regulated. And beer is usually sold to one state-owned company, that's Systembolaget, and they have a lot of power to influence how the different companies are developing by letting a certain beer brand into their shelves or not.
I think the same goes with ICA and Coop. Sorry to interrupt you, but just to take one more quick question, one quick answer, and then we move on. Anna, Zoom is yours.
Thank you so much, and thank you for a very interesting presentation, an interesting project. I was wondering what you were aiming at when it comes to the next steps of the project. Do you think that you will be able to distinguish between those different explanations for why the success in different industries. Now you looked into the milk production in Värmland, and do you expect to find different explanations in different industries, and do you expect to find differences between the two regions you have selected? And do you think it's rather a question of the regional context, or is it a question of the type of industry, also relating to the questions raised from Gary about incentives and regulations that play an important role?
Thank you, Anna. Interesting question. I try to answer quickly. So industries play a big role, and food industries are a very special case because on the one hand it's consumer driven, and that's not necessarily the case for all companies. So if you think of I don't know, for all industries, for example, the shipbuilding industry has very different dynamics and is not working closely to consumers. So that's a special thing, highly regulated as well. What we have looked at very much in a paper that is already published is on different forms of path development and different roles that demand can play. That's something that we have done. And what we want to do next is actually to look at these different regional differences and different possibilities. And there clearly we see different forms of path development in the food industry in Värmland and in the food industry in Skåne. So Skåne having access to really sophisticated consumers in an urban agglomeration, being more creative in trying very new things, I don't know, insect-based foods or whatever. And that's not the case in Värmland. In Värmland, where the consumers are more looking at locally produced food, and for example, organic food is not so important for them either. So we have different consumer groups in different types of regions, and that also influences how the companies work and how path development takes place. And the next thing is about policy implications, and that's also something that we are going to work on soon. But I guess I have to stop there. Marco.
Yeah. Thank you, Roman. And I would encourage you also to say something about the role of Systembolaget, ICA, and Coop as conveyors or mediators of demand, because your structure is pretty much the same as ours, and it's very centralized and very controlled by these giant companies that are the demand for the consumers sometimes. But okay, we'll move on, and I give Zoom to Moritz. 15 minutes, I warn you. Gently, 3 minutes before the end. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Marco, for this kind introduction. First of all, please let me know if you see the presentation.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I'm very glad to be here, at least virtually. I was also looking forward to meet you all in Estonia, actually, but it's still nice to have this exchange via Zoom. Today I'm going to present a paper which I developed together with two colleagues from the University of Cologne, Caroline Hulke, who is also in the Zoom session today, and Linus Kalbelage. And yeah, I'm really thankful for you, Roman, that you had basically the first slide was identical to my first slide here. With the contents on path creation. So it's the key topic in economic geography to understand how new paths emerge in regions. And there was a lot of research in evolutionary economic geography contributing to this understanding. But in the last couple of years, it has become an even more vivid research field by further contributions from other parts of economic geography and other regional studies. I will not go too much into detail here, but basically we can say we are on a very good track to understand how regional path development takes place. But why is an understanding of how a new path emerged so important and attracts so much scholarly attention? New regional path development is by and large positively associated with regional economic development concerns. And this is also reflected, for example, in terms which are sometimes also used like new growth path. So basically, they have the potential to generate some kind of economic gains, which are immediately inherent in this new path, like employment, new firms, and so on. But actually, little is known about how the formation of a new path affects other parts of a regional economy. Because when we think about a region which has a new successful industry, then this does not automatically also mean that it has been successful for the entire region. There are some contributions who are also talking about possible dark sides of past creation. And this is why we aim to develop a framework which allows us to understand how the formation of a new path is then affecting other parts of the regional economy. And why most of the research that is trying to understand how a new path evolves focuses on this one path, which is perfectly fine for this motivation. If you want to understand how it really affects the rest of the region, you have to include other non-participating pieces of the puzzle of the region into the analysis and connect them to the path formation process. That's what we were trying to do, to link the path formation process with what we call reformation processes of existing industries. And we define these reformation processes as changes of existing regional path initiated by the formation of a new path in a region. Our point of departure has been the formation process of the new path, where we rely on Binz et al.'s work, which say that where path creation is conceptualized as an alignment process in which heterogeneous actor networks are mobilizing key resources, and by key resources they mean knowledge, markets, financial investment, and legitimacy. And in those processes, actually, new regional assets are created and imported, or existing regional assets are reused, changed in other ways, or even destroyed. So this highlights that the mobilization of resources for the new path formation also alters the regional production environment, and thereby helping a helpful perspective to really link the path formation process to the availability and allocation of resources in a region. And then, in order to understand the effect of the newly emerging path on existing regional path, we are focusing on those markets and regional assets because they are somehow mediating this effect, which is, now the question is, how are they, what is the direction of the effect? And there we have to think about how the newly created markets and assets are related to existing regional path. Here we draw on conceptualizations of interpath relationships developed by Frankenheim et al. Recently, so their idea is basically to characterize the nature of the relationship of two or multiple emerging paths by considering whether they rely on the same assets or markets, and whether these assets are related or not, or scarce or abundant. And by thinking about those characteristics, it's possible to characterize interpath relationships as either synergetic, neutral, or competitive. And based on those interpath relations, we characterize 3 different reformation processes, which I'm going to introduce to you now individually. So negative path development we define as a decline of an existing regional path caused by the formation of a new regional path. Now you can take a look at the linkages between the interpath relations and the different types of path reformation processes. So it's not supposed to be a deterministic relation between those, but it just shows that a certain kind of interpath relation tends to have a higher probability to cause a certain kind of path reformation processes. So when we stick to this negative path development, think about a new path that accesses the same scarce assets which are required in an existing path. Both are in a competitive relationship with each other. In such a context, for example, the formation of a new path can cause reallocating effects on the availability of regional assets. For example, multinational enterprises crowding out skilled workers. This is, for example, an effect which is studied in existing literature a lot. When we think about the market size, of course, when a new path targets the same market as an existing one, this causes also conflicts and can replace the established path. And this reformation type of negative path development highlights that while creating economic gains for some, the formation of the new path may also cause losses in other parts of the region, and can therefore also be responsible for new forms of inequality. Then the second type of reformation process is path renewal, which we define in our context here as a major change of the existing industry due to the introduction of new technologies, change of business models, and so on, due to the introduction of new assets such as knowledge, technologies, and so on, which were created or introduced by the formation of the new path. And here the argument relies basically on the relatedness argument, that when you think about a new path creating new knowledge in a region, it easier spills over to existing industries if it's related to the new path. Thereby, it can contribute to path renewal. And this implies that the developmental impact of a new path exceeds the new path itself and spills over to other parts of the regional economy and helps to rejuvenate the existing regional economic structure. Then as a last reformation type, we define path expansion. We mean by path expansion growth of an existing regional path in terms of economic output, revenue, employment, caused by a multiplier effect resulting from the formation of a new regional path. This can either be created or initiated by markets that are created by the new path, which are complementary, and thereby the existing industry can benefit from it through, for example, forward and backward linkages. But it can also be the result of the creation of related assets by the new path, which is then improving the production environment. Think about the development of a port to enable an export-oriented mining path, which is then also used by other actors in the regions from different industries, which are now also using this new infrastructure and thereby increasing their economic output. So in this reformation type, new path creation prompts the expansion of an existing industry. And then, of course, it's also possible that no reformation happens at all because the new path is not related in any way to the markets and assets of existing industries, and thereby not really affects how they develop. So I won't have the time to go into detail into our empirical case study, but we applied the framework to a study in a region in northeastern Namibia, the Zambezi region. And this region is historically characterized by agricultural activities as main livelihood activity. And since the 1990s, a tourism path has emerged there, which is basically characterized by hunting tourism and photo safari tourism, as you can see here on the photos. We try to analyze how this formation process of the tourism path has then influenced the existing agricultural path. Here I will just very briefly show you how we try to apply this framework. So first of all, we analyzed the resource formation processes of the tourism path, which you can see here in the on the left side, in the left column. And then in the second step, 3 minutes? Okay. Then in the second step, we tried to analyze how this resource formation process modified the regional production environment for agriculture. And yeah, I can give you one example. So for example, zoning was an important part of the legitimization process. Here, conservancies, in order to benefit from the wildlife, which is an essential ingredient of the tourism industry there, they had to designate areas to particular land use, for example, for hunting and tourism purposes. And this was basically the allocation of very favorable agricultural land along the rivers, which was primarily previously used for agricultural purposes. So this reallocation of scarce assets has then resulted or triggered a negative path development, thereby displacing fields and so on in dry areas, which then turned those activities unprofitable. But we have, so in this slide, you see a short summary of the findings from our case study in Zambezi region. So when you only look at the tourism path, you would say, okay, it created some direct economic opportunities for the region in terms of labor, value capture, and so on. But when you broaden the scope of the analysis, you see that you have, on the one hand, negative impacts, as I tried to explain in this one brief example. But you also see that the tourism industry has generated some new assets, which now helped also to renew agricultural production in terms of new products, new standards, and it also helped to create new markets, for example, selling fruits and vegetable to lodges, which for some at least turned out to be a past expansion reformation process. How does this framework now help? So we were trying to create a link which was missing so far between two important questions. One is how new paths are created in a region, and the other is how this formation process affects existing regional structures. And thereby we try to create a perspective that acknowledges that a new path not only triggers one sole direction of development in a region, but is closely intertwined with the other parts of the regional economy. And as you saw in my very brief case study result section, it's not easy to say that a new growth path is also automatically positive for all actors in the region, but it means different development path for them. For example, it can also have dark sides. And I think it's very important for future studies if we want to connect this line of research of new path creation with regional development concerns, and we also have to include non-participating regional actors, so non-participating in those new paths that are created in order to really answer what kind of local and regional development and for whom is created through those new industries. And because I didn't have the time to go into detail on this case study, if you are interested in it, you can read it in much greater detail in our published study. Thank you for your attention, and I'm looking forward to questions and comments.
Thank you very much. Highly interesting theory, and especially the case is unique. We seldom hear about African cases. Questions, comments from the faces on my screen?
Just a quick question. Do I still have the sharing mode, or?
You are not having a sharing mode.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. I can't. Yeah, there is Lars.
Yeah, thank you, Marco. Highly interesting presentation, Moritz. I think you really digging into something which is really interesting and which has not been taken up so far so frequently. I was wondering, and maybe I have a naive question. You framed it, or you focused really on those negative development effects, and you also called it in your framework negative path development. And what about like regions that are characterized by like old industries where the region might want to get away from this old industry and into a new industry, and then would you also call it a negative effect if a new industry then draws capabilities, skills from this old industry into this new one, which might be maybe favorable for this region? So is it also then a negative effect, or is it might be worth to think of additional effects then? Yeah, that's maybe a naive question. I just was wondering about this.
Oh, thank you for this. It's a very important question. Thanks for that. So think about Schumpeter and the creative destruction process and so on. Change always hurts. It hurts at least for someone. I don't really want to make it so normative to say that it's bad, but at least it's, in our case in the Zambezi region, we now see that the change affects certain parts of the regional economy, which we can identify. And then in a second step, we could think about, is it really inevitable to those losses, or can we maybe also reduce those conflicting interests and so on by including those participants, for example, in an earlier stage. But of course, I don't want to only, so I only focus on this one example of dark sides, but as you saw, there are also other reformation processes which have more positive annotation, and in our case, we found in parallel occurring reformation processes, positive ones and negative ones. So please don't take me. I won't change, but it's about thinking about how it really affects other parts and how can we maybe reduce those effects, those negative ones. Thank you.
It's like one elevator going up and the other one down, and it depends on where you are. Any more questions, comments? I don't have a question, but I have a hint for you. If you don't know the paper by Jirsi Plasek and Victor Kveton and some other people about the dark side of regional path development or industrial path development. It was published in European Planning Studies, I think 2020. And it's a bit different from yours, but still they are creating a typology of negative path development. And I think that's might be useful for you to identify what type of negative path you are seeing in your cases. If you could very quickly answer how it's like to collect data in your case. Do you get everything you want from the case? Because I'm completely ignorant about doing field work in Africa.
So quantitative data, obtaining quantitative data is really difficult. Basically our research the field research was conducted by my co-authors, which were staying for a long time in the Zambezi region. And as most of the activities are more informal, you couldn't detect them if you wouldn't talk to the people. So it's all qualitative work. But it wasn't hard to get in contact to the people because people were also lodge owners and so on. They all farmers. They were really interested in talking and exchanging their experiences with Caro and Linus.
Okay, thank you. Very, very interesting. There are no more questions, and I'm also very conscious about timing. That's the burden of being a chairperson in any session. You can't concentrate on anything else but your watch and But yeah, we move on. Thank you very much, Moritz. And I give Zoom to Yifei. Same 15 minutes, and I will gently warn you 3 minutes before the end. So go ahead, please.
Can you see my screen right now?
Yes.
Thanks.
All good.
Thanks for hosting the session and the introduction. So my name is Yifei Wang, and I am a PhD student at the University of Gothenburg. So today I'm going to talk about something about my previous work on the location choices of Chinese investment in the EU regions. So this is a work with some other economic geographers, and it is available online right now as a working paper. So as the title suggests, we are trying to looking at the role of industry and country of origin agglomerations in the EU regions. So a brief introduction of this topic. So now we see many Chinese firms are expanding globally, and we see their major motivations is to increase their capabilities while also overcome a series of disadvantages. So our motivation for this paper is to see how do firms make their location choices in order to achieve such goal. So yeah, I'm referring to a case here. So this is a company called China Eurovehicle Technology. So it is right here with where I am sitting. It's in Gothenburg in Sweden. So as I got this picture from the firm's website, and they're saying that our firm is sitting in the heart of the Sweden's automobile cluster. And so we see this represents a kind of industry agglomeration strategy, where we refer it as the co-location with other European firms in the same or related sectors. But also we can observe another style of strategy where Bank of China would be a good example, and it has a branch in Stockholm. So I also got this introduction from their website, and there clearly says our target customers is Chinese enterprises that are going global. So we think this represents another style of strategy to staying with other Chinese firms and communities. So our research question of this study is to investigate how do firms, Chinese multinationals location choices relate to these two kinds of agglomerations when making location choices in Europe. So if we go back to the literature, then we can see there's a lot of studies on multinationals and agglomerations. And this is both an IB topic and also economic geography. So, but different from previous research that only looking at one kind of agglomerations, here we are trying to looking at two kinds of agglomerations together. We consider the joint effects, also the relationship and heterogeneity. By choosing Chinese multinationals as our focus, we respond to some recent calls that recognize the rising importance of multinationals from emerging economies. And by choosing regions instead of countries as our special dimension, we respond to some paper that recognize the importance of subnational context and to recognize the importance of regions. So about the theory, why do firms need to agglomerate? About this industry agglomeration part of the story, our arguments comes from the old wisdom of Marshall, where he claims that there's three kinds of benefits, including access to labor, to intermediate goods, and potential knowledge spillovers. And this could either happen through like observation, cooperation, and market transactions. So we think these benefits are applied to all kinds of firms, but it's important, especially important for our Chinese firms, because since they have these disadvantages in technological capabilities, so we expect that they will be very willing to access these industrial clusters in Europe. And the second part about country of origin agglomeration, it comes from the idea of social networks. So we think the country of origin agglomeration represents the ethnic-based network. And we further divide it into co-ethnic business and social network. So we think this kind of network could also bring firms a lot of benefits. For example, they can tell latecomers about the institution environment, business regulations, or they can share business informations. So we also expect these benefits apply to all kinds of companies, but it's more important for our focus for our Chinese companies, because the Chinese culture is the personal connections is a very important part. So whenever we want to get something done or we have some problem, we are very likely to use our personal connections and resources to achieve such goal. And based on this consideration, we expect that the motivation to chase country of origin agglomeration will also positively related with the location choice. And apart from the baseline hypothesis, we further try to investigate the relationship between the two kinds of agglomerations. And we posed two contrasting hypotheses. So if you believe the complementary story, then it's like once you get into Europe, your Chinese friend can refer you to their European partners. So in this case, it's more easier to get the trust and build partnership with European companies. And in this way, you can get even more benefits from the industrial agglomeration. But this could also be argued from the other side, that is the substitution story. So, for example, with the Chinese community here, you can easily find your suitable labors. They even speak your own language. And with the Chinese firms here, you can build a partnership. So you don't need to find other European companies to become your suppliers and customers. And even more, so if you are, when you are speaking the same language and you have the shared cultural background, it's easier to develop trust. So this facilitates the transmission of knowledge and business information. So it also has a potential of knowledge spillovers and transmission. And based on this consideration, we expect that the country of origin agglomeration can also substitute the benefits of industry agglomeration. So this way, if you stay with the Chinese, then the industrial agglomeration doesn't sound very attractive to the companies. And to test our hypothesis, we use some data from FDI markets. It is an online database that monitors all the cross-border transactions in the world. And we look at 29 European countries for the time 2008 to 18. We have 1,164 projects across 164 regions. So we have a figure here. And so as you can see, the projects are very unevenly distributed across Europe. It is highly clustered in Western and Southern Germany, and also some regions around Paris and London. So for our covariables, we use sectoral employment to proxify the industry agglomeration, and we use the input-output table to measure the relationship between sectors, and we further construct a measurement for inter-industry agglomeration. For the Chinese side of variables, we also make it into two, and we have the number of previous Chinese investment to proxify the business network, where we use the presence of big Chinese community or Chinatowns to see if there is a Chinese social network. And also at the regional level, we use some data from Eurostat, like the World Bank, etc., to control for the regional specific characteristics. And we use conditional logic for the empirical analysis. So for the results, we got positive correlations between our agglomerations and location choices. So they support our hypothesis, and also sorry, other variables such as market size, regional accessibility, and labor market characteristics and business cost are correlated with the location choice. And then we try to add all the interaction terms into the model, and we see the results support the hypothesis of substitution. That is, staying with other Chinese can bring firms many benefits, so that staying with other European companies doesn't sound very attractive. And in particular, when we try to add all the interaction terms into the model, we find 2 out of 4 are significant. So we think this represents that our Chinese business and social networks are able to capture different dimensions so that they can substitute different kinds of agglomerations. So for example, our Chinese business network means that firms can find other Chinese firms as their suppliers and customers. That's often the benefit you can expect in an inter-industry agglomeration. So in this way, when you got your Chinese friend as your business partners, you don't need to look for other European partners, and this way it substitutes the benefits of inter-industry agglomeration. And to check the robustness of our results, we also divide it into different business functions, namely headquarters, innovative activities, sales, and manufacturing. So we also observe that business functions have preference over different kinds of agglomerations. So yeah, discussion in the end. I hope I'm not running out of time. So again, we emphasize our potential contribution to the IB study and regional studies. And we think our results have some implications, policy implications. So we think policymakers that aims to attract foreign investment can often recognize the importance of fostering industrial clusters. That is nothing wrong, but they often ignore the importance of country of origin agglomeration. So our results suggest that the Chinese companies are very likely to stay with their other Chinese companies and communities. So this should suggest that regions that welcome Chinese investment early on might have an advantage in getting more investment in the future. And also, so our results suggest that Chinese like to stay together. So, but this may not be a very favorable result for policymakers, because the point of getting foreign investment to the region is to hope they can benefit the host economy and hope they can have more interactions with the local firms. So, so we think apart from getting investment to the region, is equally important to promote some interactions between local firms and multinational firms. So to make the foreign investment maximum its benefits to the host region. And for future research, we propose 2 points here. First of all, we choose Chinese as our focus, but apparently we're not trying to find some one-size-fits-all solution. We think it's further research is required to study the multinationals from other emerging economies and to add more empirical evidence in this regard. And the last point is that following the previous cluster within cluster discussion, so we think the fact that Chinese firms may operate in such enclaves is very interesting, and we think it would be interesting to investigate in the future about how do firms operate after they start their business in Europe. Do they really look like operating only with their peers, or do they really have some more interactions with the European companies and local actors? We think that would be something interesting to look at. And to link it with our themes of this session today, that multinational firms as external actors could also contribute to the new past development, regional past development. And I think these are very interesting topics, and also my future, also my personal interest. So hopefully I will devote more time on this in the future. And yeah, that's the end of the presentation. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you. Highly interesting again. I think Chinese ownership has made Volvo better. That's my personal opinion. Volvo cars, that's very close to Roman and yourself. Highly interesting topic, because there are increasing political tensions also between China and the Western world, and the Guangxi, I don't know how to pronounce the personalized networks of the Chinese, are becoming more and more visible here. And it's like Japanese companies in the late 80s and early 90s, when the whole Western world was so afraid of Japanese, and now we are worried about Chinese but wanting to have Chinese money. So it's a kind of a paradox. Any questions or comments or expressions of joy again, of course? Moritz, please.
Yeah, thank you for this exciting presentation, and I think the findings are really interesting. I was just wondering if it would be possible to also consider policies in the model. I was wondering the Silk and Road Initiative, for example. They have the strategy to channel investments to certain locations in Europe. I only know the example of Duisburg in Germany quite well, where a lot of Chinese investments were channeled in the last couple of years, and many more will come probably in the next years. And there's probably also some kind of policy intervention that is even more increasing those concentration processes. Do you think it's possible to integrate it in a model by translating the policy aims, policy strategies into variables or something?
Thanks for the comment. Yeah, very good point. I think, yeah, indeed we ignored this, but I just previous studies suggest that the political agreement between like two cities or two regions between China and Europe could promote the investment going on. Where do they go? So I think, yeah, it would be very interesting, and yeah, maybe we could include some like dummies to indicate if there is a agreement or sister cities like that, something like that, to control for this kind of policy effects in the location choices. Yeah, thank you.
I have a question that is going a little bit beyond your presentation, but looking at it from my perspective, my university has been very keen on collaborating with Chinese universities, Peking University, Beijing Normal, Fudang, Tongji, and so forth. And there has been an ambition to have joint programs and a lot of exchange students and all that. But now people are a bit worried, and I would say that we are confused. We don't know what to think anymore, because the politics has changed in China. Can you see any changes in your field of study in the increasing tension between USA, China, Europe, China? Can you witness any signs of that?
A little bit.
Yeah, it's a difficult question, I know, but it's.
For example, I did my exchange year during my bachelor's in the US for a year, and it was funded by the government, and so they will cover for tuition and living expenses when I was there. But this they will kind of finance many students each year back then, so to do as bachelors to do exchange studies. But right after I went back home, and this program got cut, and now it's certainly disappeared. So the students cannot really, yeah, if they can still go, but there's no finance support from the government or from school anymore. So yeah, but I'm not politics, but I still feel it's nice to have young people to have more some global communications, but I think somehow the tensions is going on, and they're not very supportive as they do before.
Yeah, it's really same, and same goes with FDI. I know cases in Finland where there are Chinese investments or investors looking potential in Finland, and then people here are saying it's okay, but not over 50%. And Chinese are saying, yes, if we get over 50%. That's a kind of a power game going on at the moment. And I think this is a topic I could go on for ever. And I think that's the good timing to end the discussion, because I don't have any more questions from the audience. Thanks a lot and good luck in your research. It's highly important, of course. And then we come back to Nordic countries, to Norway, and the final presentation is by Maria, and you have the 15 minutes, and I warn you when you inhale and try to be as gentle as possible. Okay, Zoom is yours.
Thank you. Okay, here we go. Okay, so hello, my name is Maria, and today I will be presenting together with my colleague Maren. We are both writing this paper together with the preliminary title Regional Restructuring Through the Lenses of Agency and Assets, an Analysis of 2 Norwegian Regions. And we are both PhD students at the University of Agder, and we have been working on this paper for the past months, and we are currently traveling back and forth to our case regions for interviews, as this is a qualitative study. So the motivation for our study is that regional economies face the constant challenge of rebuilding and changing their economic structures and counteract old industrial activities to avoid stagnation. Restructuring of regional economies has become increasingly important in recent years due to globalization, digitalization, climate change, and other grand societal challenges. To rebuild economic structures and to meet these challenges, and to also be resilient in times of crisis, certain conditions and mechanisms are key. According to Jolly, Grillitsch, and Hansen, agency is such a key mechanism, while Isaksen, Eriksen, and Rypestøl highlight asset modification as important for regional economic restructuring. Recent research on path development highlights the role of agency, illustrating that agency influences path development and can be used to explain why some regions grow more or less than others with similar structural preconditions. Another key mechanism for path development is the modification of assets, as different strategies of asset modification are both key to alterations within the industry and to create a supportive environment for path development. So both agency and asset modification are important in path development. However, research connecting the two is to our knowledge scarce, even though there are exceptions. Kyllingstad et al. Argued that the connection between actors, asset modification, and path outcomes is underdeveloped in existing literature and needs to be explored further. In addition, Mjørner and Trippel call for more research investigating how change agents influence the regional environment to establish more beneficial conditions for the emergence of new growth paths. In response to this, this paper develops and tests an analytical framework focusing on the connection between different types of agency and asset processes, investigating the impact it can have on regional industrial development. More specifically, we suggest a connection between change agency and asset modification, and between reproductive agency and the novel concept of asset extension, and study their possible path outcomes. So the analytical framework will be tested through a case study of 2 Norwegian regions, the Stavanger region and the Grenland region, which are both undergoing restructuring processes. By investigating how agency have been instrumental in the ongoing regional restructuring processes in the case regions, and how agency influenced assets to their advantage, this paper seeks to contribute to a deeper understanding of the role of agency and asset modification in path development. And additionally, considering the pandemic that has been going on, we want to also investigate the effects of the crisis on the region's ongoing restructuring processes. So we are interested in how industries and regions are being restructured in a more sustainable direction, and what significance different types of agency and asset modification processes have in that context. So the analytical framework departs from the context of a regional innovation system, and the framework presents the proposed connection between the different types of agency and asset modification processes. In the context of the emergence of new growth paths, Grillitsch and Sotarauta introduced the trinity of change agency as an explanation for the varying success regions have in growing new industrial paths. Change agency includes actions for path-breaking innovations, catalyzing innovation, and institutional change. And building on Grillitsch and Sotarauta's framework of change agency, Bekkelund makes an argument for not neglecting the role of reproductive agency in new path development. And we understand reproductive agency as not just a stabilizing force to resist new activities, but also a force for incorporating changes into existing economic structures and making them stick to the region. So reproductive agency is thus a key part in developing new paths, while change agency is important for the emergence of new paths. The different forms of asset modification processes entail alterations of assets at various levels, such as through reuse of existing assets, creation of new assets, and the destruction of assets. Aspects not included in asset modification from our point of view are incremental changes in the use of prevailing assets to extend the existing regional industrial path or to embed and stabilize changes in existing structures with the use and influence of assets. So we therefore introduce the concept of asset extension, and examples of this are embeddedness and decodification of former rules, for instance. Bekkelund argues that actors can enact different forms of agency simultaneously and across time, and that the type of agency enacted does not necessarily coincide with the former role of an actor. And we adapt this view, and because of this, the top boxes in our framework are linked with an arrow illustrating that the type of agency is not a static state. Instead, actors can perform both reproductive agency and change agency throughout time. And the bottom boxes in the framework are also connected, again with an arrow, as asset modification processes can have a need to be stabilized, while asset extension will eventually be modified. Our framework further connects reproductive agency and asset extension based on the stabilizing and incremental nature of the concepts. Actors performing reproductive agency may be resistant to bigger changes. However, it is difficult to disregard any form of change in firms and regions as new challenges and tasks are imminent. Incremental changes are thus often necessary to adjust to these tasks and challenges. And through asset extension processes, reproductive agency influence assets to adjust and stabilize. This connection can also hinder regional restructuring, as transformational changes are not likely to occur. The connection between change agency and asset modification, however, is based on the transformational elements that both concepts entail. We expect that the power relationship between reproductive agency and change agency affects which path outcomes are expected. On one hand, if there are more actions pointing towards reproductive agency in a region, this will most likely lead to path extension and possibly path upgrading, characterized by small changes over time within an industry or bigger changes within an existing path. On the other hand, if change agency is dominating in a region, there is a higher probability that this can lead to new path developments, such as path creation. So we aim to test this framework by analyzing the restructuring processes that is ongoing in our case regions, and we want to investigate the relationship between reproductive agency and change agency, and how the influence of assets affects new path development. And now Maren will continue introducing our case regions and some preliminary results.
So our study follows a case study design. We have chosen two Norwegian regions, the labor market region of Stavanger and Greenland. Our reason for choosing these exact regions is that both regions have traditionally been specialized in dirty industries, specifically oil and gas industry in Stavanger and petrochemicals in Greenland. But both regions have also the last years made it their mission to change their industry structure. Stavanger works towards becoming more diversified and supporting emerging industries developed in the region, while in Greenland, the mission is to become the world's first climate positive region and changing their industry structure towards greener and more environmentally friendly industrial activities. Both of these regions have active clusters and a strong presence of industry actors and local authorities that works actively towards the region's goals. However, the regions differ in both size and the direction of the paths that they are on. They both work towards a changed industry structure, but their point of departure and their goals differ. We have started interviewing actors in both regions, and as of now, we have completed 8 semi-structured interviews with actors in Greenland and 9 interviews in Stavanger. 15 of the interviews have been in person and the last 2 have been digital over Teams. We are about halfway through, as our aim is to minimum do a total of 30 interviews, 15 in each region, but more if we see that that is necessary. To better investigate the concepts and dynamics, we have developed 4 empirical research questions. We are wondering who are executing reproductive and change agency in the case regions. What type of assets influence the different types of agency? And are there any conflicts between actors over these assets? Then we ask how the pandemic has impacted the regions, specifically if it has had any effect on agency dynamics or assets. At last, we are also curious to know whether or not the regions are able to stay on course in their respective paths during such a shock that the pandemic has been. Have the regions been resilient, and in what way? As we are about halfway through our data collection, we have some preliminary findings. We have not yet properly analyzed the data, so these preliminary findings are more of a first impression of a few selected observations that we have made so far. When it comes to agency, one thing that comes up in several interviews and in both regions is the role of politicians. In Greenland, there seems to have been a lack of support from politicians, disrupting or opposing to industry initiatives. In Stavanger, the situation is a bit different, with politicians willing to support industry initiatives. However, in neither region, politicians seem to take a strong initiative themselves in the process towards changing the industry structure. This might be an illustration of how reproductive agency can both resist change and also how it can be a stabilizing force that embeds changes. When considering assets, the role of investors and the access to financing seems to be vital, especially in Stavanger. As one of the people we talked to expressed, the private investors in Stavanger has built their fortune and their investments on money earned from and through the oil and gas industry, an industry that they understand and trust. So the idea of investing in other industries is very risky compared to what they already have been doing. We are curious. Yes, we are curious about the private investors' mindsets and actions around the changes happening in the region's industries. It could be that the lack of access to finances might be hampering for emerging industries to develop and could result in path extension. We are curious about how financing as an asset impacts path development and its connection to asset extension or asset modification processes. We also find many different types of assets mentioned as vital for the regions. Lack of skilled workers seems to be a challenge both places, and well-designed infrastructure and clean energy is mentioned as competitive advantages. This will be interesting to analyze further through the lens of asset modification and asset extension. We are eager to dig deeper into our data and start to properly analyze it. Most importantly, we need to explore and conceptualize these dynamics between agency and assets and how this affects regional restructuring. Thank you for listening. Any comments or questions are very much appreciated.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'm always very keen on myself hearing something about Stavanger. That is such an interesting place when it comes to oil and gas and the future of oil and gas and the future of Norway, not only Stavanger. But Roman, please.
Thanks for this very exciting presentation, which I really find interesting, this discussion on agents and assets. of course, when you, Maria, presented this list of different dynamics between assets and agency, the first thing for me was to think what could be assets for regional industrial change, and what type of agency are you talking about? And then I got from the presentation, I got the feeling that identifying the necessary assets and identifying the type of agents is a result of or is the goal of your empirical analysis. Is that the case, or do you start with some framework in mind, which type of assets and which type of agency you need for regional industrial change?
When it comes to assets, we have been discussing if we should aim at looking at certain assets, but then when we started collecting, or before we started collecting data, we said no, we wanted to go a little bit wider and include both type like natural assets, infrastructural, human, and then see kind of what the data collection told us about that. And then when it comes to agency, we did some beforehand. We picked out like the type of actors that we thought would give us some insights on this, and then we kind of build on from there.
Because of course, if you do this approach, there is a high risk that you interview policymakers and then you get the story of how important policy was in this process.
Mm-hmm.
So then the results will depend very much on whom you're going to.
Yes, yes, that is true. And there we are very like, I don't know how to say, strict with ourselves, that we are interviewing different types of, I mean, not just politicians, but the industry, the cluster, the like different types of actors. So we're not just getting kind of one side of the story.
More questions? Based on your interviews and data collection so far, can you identify any champions for change in either places? I can remember reading and seeing some documentaries on Stavanger's early days in the 70s, and I was thinking about Rettedal, who was the mayor of Stavanger at that time. Who is the Rettedal of today, or are there groups of people who are really working for cleaner industries?
Well, we have a very clear example in Greenland, because then there's the cluster, the industrial green tech cluster that's been developed there, kind of started out with this goal of becoming the world first climate positive industrial region. And the way they have been doing this, or getting the vision kind of embedded in the region, is by having all of the big players, kind of the big companies coming along on this, and then they see the effects of the smaller businesses. So you see, especially in Greenland, it's the cluster together with the big companies, kind of. And then in Stavanger, it's a bit more unclear, because it's a lot more, in Greenland, it's very kind of concentrated on the processed industry, but then now we see in Stavanger that it's becoming more and more diversified, with strong clusters in different, it comes to technology within the health sector, when it comes to maritime industry. So it's a lot more scattered, kind of, with strongholds in kind of in all of the camps, if I can say it like that, Maren.
Yeah, and also I can add there that a lot of people claim to be that they are the champions, but what they actually do is something else. And so we feel, or at least I feel, that a lot of the people that we have spoken to, they want to take that claim for themselves, but we are not so sure that they're actually doing it. And a lot of people also say that it has to be the industry themselves that change. And so yeah, it's a bit there's a tension here too for us to juggle while we go into this. So yeah.
Yeah, I can see the challenge of studying change agency grassroots levels, because there are so many heroic stories, and you always have to see beyond those and through those heroic stories and find evidence of mobilization or coordination or whatever. And especially when when people are talking about themselves, they are always, you know it, so I don't have to say it, but that's the fun part of doing this line of study, trying to see through everything and find the actual actions or influence that has been used. You have been perfect in timing, I have to say, all four of you, exemplary. You have made my work easy. I don't have any more questions. I think because of that, it's time to conclude. I find this session excellent. This was really, really, really interesting. 4 well thought out papers with important and exciting observations. So thank you all presenters. Thank you for all questions and discussion. And now we have 1 hour break, and then we have the final keynote of this conference by Elvira Ujarra. Right, Kari, do you want to remind us about Elvira's presentation?
Elvira is also present here, so I saw that she's here. So let's see in 1 hour.
Good to see your name, Elvira, and see you soon.
Thank you for arranging.
Enjoy lunch break.
See you in a bit.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks for organizing.